Okay, it's a couple minutes past 3 here on the East Coast. I think we can go ahead and get started with this month's Coffee and Compliance episode. And I'm excited to be joined today by Kelly Kendall. Kelly is the CEO and president at KNCSS, and they are both an authorized C3PAO, and Kelly is also a CMMC certified assessor. So very excited to have him join us this month. Again, I'm Jamie Leupold. I'm the Director of Channels and Alliances here at Prevail, and I'm a CCP. Obviously, a lot has happened since last month's Coffee and Compliance episode, where we were hoping that the CMMC release would come out and answering questions kind of based on what we thought would happen. And the great news is, after a wonderful early/late Christmas present, we do now have the NPRM, the CMMC proposed rule has been released. So a lot to cover this month, which is exciting. We've got some great questions that have already come in, but if you do have any questions for either of us, feel free to use the Q&A function, and if time permitted, we will get to as many questions as possible. So with that, I'd like to introduce Kelly. Kelly, say a little bit more about yourself, and then I think what you wanted to do was kind of cover some of the key takeaways, that you've uncovered from your reading of the NPRM before we get into the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Orly, for getting us all set up and getting us on this. Appreciate everybody's time as well. Yeah, this has been a very interesting last 3 weeks. I don't know if I've done anything else other than CMMC proposed rule related stuff ever since the 22nd, but it's been exciting. It's been fun. It's been crazy. It's been frustrating. Well, I guess we'll say it's been all the above, but no, looking forward to getting into this and just trying to keep the perspective on what matters to an OSC. There's a lot of perspectives for the rule. The rule has a lot to it, obviously, all 234 pages of it. So you have the perspective of, like us as a C3PO, things that matter to us, or things that matter to people pursuing the certifications for CCA or CCP. But I really want to keep this focused on what are some of the most important things to know from the perspective of the companies that are actually pursuing the certification. That's our audience. That's what matters to you. So yeah, we really want to get this focused on the things that are important to know about this, because there's a lot of stuff in here, and there's big, but this is the stuff as you see on the screen right now. This is what I want to focus on. First of all, talking about the time frame, then going into a little bit about the cost and just some of the other aspects of this proposed rule that I think is really important to know. So jumping in on time frame. So first of all, in terms of the time frame itself, the first thing you have is the actual comment period. So the rule came out on, I think it was the 22nd. It's a proposed rule. You have a public comment period. Public comments are due on February 26th. So right now, I think there's already about 17 comments. I haven't checked it in the last couple of days, but there's already been about 17 comments already posted. Some of the comments are helpful. Some are not so much. Some are irrelevant. Some are just complaining. Just to be honest, some of them I think are just complaining about things. But anyways, a lot of us in the industry, I'm part of the C3PO community. We have a group called the C3PO Forum. All the C3POs get together and talk every week, different groups like that. We're all talking about this. We have comments that we're going to be submitting. I'm at about 10 comments that I'm considering submitting, 10 different things that I'm considering submitting a comment on. Some ideas, some clarifications and whatnot. But anyways, these public comments need to get in by the 26th. What happens after that? DoD is going to go into this adjudication period, if you will. They have to go through and review, consider every single comment. How deeply they consider them, what kind of changes might actually come from them at this point is up in the air. They're probably not likely to make any major changes, anything that's going to really cause any recalculations of all of the cost estimates and time estimates, everything else. Don't expect any kind of earth-shattering changes in the final rule, but they have no time frame restriction. There's nothing that says they have to adjudicate the comments by X date. What we can look at is the history and learning from our buddy Jacob Horn on a webinar earlier this morning, did some analysis of all the rules and timeframes. And typically it's 280 days, business days, from the time a public rule comes out to the time where they get through adjudicating all the comments. So it's not going to be quick. The DoD is motivated. We're motivated. I hope that they get it done faster, but realistically, it's probably going to be up to a year. Hopefully not more. Hopefully sooner. So they're going through, they're considering all the comments, considering any changes they're making. So that's one thing that's going on. But you have two rules. You have the proposed rule that's going into, it's called the 32 CFR or Title 32 Code of Federal Regulations. You have Title 32 going in. That's what this proposed rule is. But you also have the Title 48 rule. This is what actually is going to revise DFAR's 7012 clause. This is what is actually going to trigger things starting to show up in contracts. This is all of the contractual contracting related regulations, if you will. So Title 48, it's on the docket to be submitted in March of this year. Once that's in, hopefully that'll go in as an interim final rule itself. That way it can get implemented quicker, not have to go through another 1 year of public comments like it is on the 32 CFR. So you have that going on at the same time. What does all this really mean? Ultimately, I'm seeing a lot of different opinions on this from all of us, quote unquote, talking heads in the industry. We're seeing a lot of different estimates on when will the interim final rule actually get out. I'm sticking to my guns. I'm sticking with my expectation of Q1 25. It could be longer, but I, myself, others in this group, in this community, if you will, are still mostly saying Q1 2025. That's when the assessments can start. Once that final rule comes out, we as assessors will now be able to start actually doing the real CMMC assessments. That doesn't mean that's when it's going to start showing up in contracts. What's going to happen for contracts is first, that Title 48 rule comes out, DFAR 7021 and potentially 7012, they're considering revising this year too in rulemaking, but 7021 gets revised. As soon as 7021 is revised, there would be I believe it's going to be a 60-day time frame before it becomes in effect. That's the trigger for it to start showing up in contracts. That's where this CMMC rollout, as you see here on the screen, you guys are seeing the slides. I'm not looking at them myself, but hopefully it is showing them. But if not, phase one, you basically have a 6-month window where all of the self-assessments are going to start showing up in this time frame. So phase one, only self-assessments are beginning. It kicks off on that effective date of the 7021 revision. After that, you have phase two. Phase two is where it's going to start showing up in contracts. And this is where the expectations of level 2 certifications are going to start being required. Possibly some of the CMMC level 3 certifications are going to be required at that stage. After phase two, it goes into phase three. That's going to start after a year from phase two. Phase four starts after a year after that. It doesn't really matter right now what each one of those mean. What it matters is they're estimating that they're going to roll this out over a 3-year period. You're going to hear different numbers. You're going to hear numbers of a 4-phase rollout, a 3-year rollout, a 7-year rollout. The 7-year period is the time it's going to take for every single contract that's out there to have CMMC requirements applied to it, because they're applying it to only new contracts, new RFPs that come out, and any option years on existing contracts. Well, those contracts that have the option years, eventually they're going to roll over into new contracts after all the option years have been done. So it's going to take 7 years for all contracts to get through that process of getting CMMC added to them. So if you hear different numbers, hopefully that explanation will help. All right. Probably the thing that matters most to business owners, I'm myself, small business owner, my business partner, Chuck Bresh, and I, We run KNC, we're a cybersecurity services provider, but we're also a C3PO authorized, as mentioned before. What matters to business owners, C-suite executives, people who are looking at implementing CMMC? The cost. So in the proposed rule, there's a lot of estimations. There's a lot of assessments. There's a lot of information about what it may or may not cost. I want to hone in on what matters, in my opinion, most to OSCs. What will actually cost me as an OSC to pay an authorized C3PO like us to get the assessment done? That number in there, they actually estimated, and I'm more candid maybe than most C3POs, but that's how we operate. The estimate right now for the category of other than small, so anything other than small businesses, they're estimating about $52,000 as the cost. That's based on a 5-person team to get the assessment done by a C3PO. For a small business, and that's a community we work with, primarily small business and medium businesses, they're estimating that it's going to cost you $31,000 that you pay to an authorized C3PO to get your assessment done. They're basing that off of a 3-person team that covers all of the different phases that are a part of an assessment, from the pre-assessment workup to the interview week to the post-assessment. It's covering all that. So that 31,000 and 52,000 number. Let me tell you about my perspective as a C3PO. We have done lots of estimates. We've done lots of proposals. We've done assessments. We've heard from other C3POs. So this area of these numbers, we know this stuff. And based on how we're estimating right now, based on what we're being told as, here's the process for us as a C3PO to go through. This is what we expect you to do. So I can tell you this, our quotes out there have been between 25 and 50,000 for the small to medium assessment scope. It's not so much a matter of the size of the business, but it's the assessment scope that really matters. So for a small assessment scope to a medium assessment scope, $25,000 to $50,000 has been the typical range. For that larger size, 50,000 to 75.
Can I ask you a question, Kelly?
You can, absolutely.
Are these annual costs, or how is this a cost that an organization is going to have to pay every year?
This is a weekly cost, but you pay it to me personally. Did I forget? No, I'm sorry. I'm bad humor. No, this is a one-time cost. Yes, very, very important clarification. So this is the total cost in theory. I mean, this isn't an exact number because it's obviously going to be market-based, but this is their estimation for what you pay a one-time fee to an authorized C3PO to get your certification assessment conducted. So yeah, good point. Thank you for asking that. So that is a one-time cost. Technically, it's going to be repetitive, but it's every 3 years because of the window for getting reassessed.
So you wouldn't have to pay that every year. You pay it once, and then you're good for
Correct.
3 years, assuming you pass. Okay, great. So make sure.
Exactly. So now another thing that's a really big topic is this whole thing about reimbursed. And there was some statements made by some of the early players that CMMC is going to be reimbursable. CMMC is going to be recoverable, but it was never really well stated, how that's going to happen, what will actually get done. What I can tell you in the proposed rule, they very, very clearly state multiple times that they assume all of the implementation is already done or should have already been done. There's no consideration for reimbursement or recovery of expenses for implementing and getting ready for CMMC. The only thing that's going to be considered will be for the assessment costs. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is they look at it as this stuff's been around for a long time. Everybody with a contract has already been signing off saying they already have done these things. They should have already done it. Therefore, they should have already paid the implementation costs, if you will. So they don't consider.
Kelly, is that because folks are already, in theory, attesting to conforming with 800-171 Rev 2 today, based on DPAR 7012 obligations?
Yep, exactly. Which is kind of what triggered CMMC. I mean, really is triggered, is once they have, conducted assessments of those organizations saying, yes, we're being compliant, they came to find out it was horrifically not even close to compliant. And that kicked off having to have CMMC. CMMC is not a requirements program. CMMC is a verification program. It's verifying that you've implemented what you're supposed to have already implemented according to the contract language, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a really key point that they're really seriously saying, not that it doesn't matter to them how much it costs to implement, but it's not a concern for them as far as reimbursement. CMMC is what's called an unfunded mandate. And this I learned from my buddy Chris Newborn at the Defense Acquisition University, a retired professor there. This is not funded. There's not like a big pool of money that the DoD has been given to use to help reimburse companies for getting CMMC. It's an unfunded mandate. So until there's something done on their side where they have the funding, if you will, to do this reimbursement, really the only thing that can happen is going to be recovery. And I'm posting a public comment in line with this recovery because I want them to give more information on it. You have different types of contracts. You have a fixed price contract. Well, for a fixed price contract, the only way you're going to get reimbursed is just incorporating it into your fixed price. It's market competitive, and they talk about that in the proposed rule. But for something like a time and materials contract or a cost type contract, it's going to be baked into your overhead. But there's no understanding right now of how do I have, if I only have one contract with the DoD, do I get reimbursed and recover in my overhead the full amount over the course of the contract? How much can I add to my overhead? What's reasonable? What will be allowed? If I have 10 contracts, if I have 100 contracts, there's all this kind of stuff to this that really needs to get flushed out. Now, it might come out when they come out with the Title 48 rule, which is more about the contracting. We might get the answers in March, and that would be cool. But as of right now, it's not very well stated how that could work. And I know that's a really big question and a really big concern for the OSCs, because a lot of money is being spent for this, not just the assessment cost, implementation. Everybody on here, I'm sure, should know implementation is not easy, it's not fast, and it's not cheap. So this is a very, very big aspect of that.
Great. Why don't we talk a little bit about self-assessments and affirmations, but then we've got a lot of questions lined up, so I want to make sure we have ample time to cover those.
Okay, cool. So I'll hit fast on these last three topics. The self-assessments and affirmations, this is really important to understand. So level one is just a self-assessment, but it's not your self-assessments of the past. This is not your grandpa's self-assessments, so to speak, to make bad jokes. So prior, we had self-attestation. It wasn't, people were saying we were doing something, it wasn't getting done. That was a problem. That's gone away. They have self-assessments, but these self-assessments have teeth. The teeth is the affirmations. There's a difference between the word affirmation and attestation. They've changed and they're using the word affirmation all throughout here. I'm not an attorney, but I looked it up. Affirmation basically is you're testifying, if you will, that what you're saying is the truth. You're saying that, yes, we are compliant. And attestation is you're saying, yes, we are compliant and we are proving it. The attestation is the proof. So I'm not really sure why they're switching, why they're going with affirmation, but essentially an affirmation is something that is being signed off on by a senior executive of the company, CEO, some C-level, someone who is an officer of the company who has that signing authorization. They're the ones signing off saying, yes, we are compliant. The reason this matters is because that's going to lead to False Claims Act. So if you're out there affirming every year, yep, we're good to go. Level one, we're good to go. We're assessed, we're good to go. And then you get assessed by DIBCAC or something happens or whatever may come to fruition that causes it to be looked at, and you're not, that executive in that company are not going to have fun. They're going to have some tough times. So these affirmations, the whole point of this is they have teeth. So with level one, every year you have to do a self-assessment and post into the SPRS system that you have passed. You're not allowed to have a POAM. Level one is an absolute have to pass. This is for FCI. So level two, there is I'm going to do air quotes if you can see me, hopefully. Air quotes of level two self-assessments. There is a very, very small amount of contracts based on their estimations that this would even be applicable to. This is that term bifurcation, if you've heard this at all through CMMC.
Yeah,
Where
Kelly, it's
there's
funny. We just had a question come up that I was answering live. My understanding is about 5% of the contracts will be at level 2. You'll be able to self-assess. That's
Yep,
based on DoD estimates.
exactly. Yeah, 5% of the DIB, and I checked it too. 2% though of small business defense industrial base. So very, very small chance that that's going to be the requirement in the contract that you're bidding on, that it'll be a CMMC level 2 self-assessment. There's another thing in here about how the level 2 assessment does not satisfy the need for level 1 assessments. So one thing to realize here is, in my opinion, they're pushing the level 1 really hard because people have kind of been forgetting about it. The FCI thing. It's not marked. We don't know what FCI is. Level 1's not important. I'm going after level 2. Now they're stating it very clearly. You have to do both a level 1 assessment with the affirmations for it and a level 2 if you're pursuing level 2. They are separate assessments. Even if your FCI environment is the same as your CUI environment, they still treat it as separate assessments and separate affirmations. So I thought that was interesting. I'm going to actually post a public comment related to that. I don't think that's the most effective way to say that a level 2 doesn't necessarily, I think that's the terms they use, necessarily meet the requirements for level 1. If you're doing level 2, I won't spend much time on this. I'm going to move forward. I'm just going to say that I don't agree, and this needs to be revised slightly. Okay, OT treatment. Dun, dun, dun. So this is a good one. From the perspective of an OSC, I work with companies that are in the manufacturing space. OT is a pain. It's a very, very challenging. There's this category of assets called specialized assets. This includes your IoT, your OT, your government furnished equipment, test equipment, stuff like that. What they've done in this proposed rule is said that the specialized assets have to be documented, but they are not assessed against the CMMC requirements. This is good news. The documentation requirements aren't easy, so to speak, but they don't have to be assessed. What has to be done is they have to be documented in an SSP. They have to be in your asset inventory. It has to be listed in your network diagram. And you have to show in your, how you're managing those based on your risk-based policies and procedures, et cetera. So documented, but not assessed is the short version. And at level 3, though, if you are pursuing CMMC level 3, they will be assessed, but you're allowed to have what they're calling an intermediary device that can allow them to meet the requirements. We need that defined better, but they're at least stating that. So level 3 is a little more challenging.
Kelly, not that we want to deep dive into level 3 on this, but I believe the estimates are, it's what, roughly 2% or so of all contractors will need to meet level 3, maybe less than that.
It's less than that. I think the estimate I saw, not as percentage, but I think it was like 1,500 companies or something like that will be level 3. I mean, it's a very, very small. This is the the APT threats, higher threats. It'll be interesting to see how it actually plays out. And I've heard some people talk about if it's going to be that bad, just make the information classified. That was funny, but
exactly.
Yeah, that's level 3 is challenging, and level 3, their cost estimations, they actually, don't consider implementation costs for anything except for level 3. They did the estimates, and they're really, really high numbers. $2 million to implement and $400,000+ per year to maintain. I mean, CMMC level 3 will be highly challenging.
Got it. That's good. I think at this point, Kelly, why don't we hop into the questions? We've got a lot of good ones. Want to keep this on time. So I think question 1, pretty straightforward. Do you think the new CMMC proposed rule will pass through? If ever, when will they commence this new rule? I think we kind of covered the timeline. Estimates are about a year or so. Obviously, we've got to go through the official comment period. After that, it's really up to DoD to decide how quickly they want to adjudicate. There's, as you mentioned, there's nothing stopping them from adjudicating this in 6 months. But realistically, we're probably looking at about a year. So I think, that one's pretty straightforward. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add there.
No, just the resounding yes, this is happening 100%. Absolutely. this is happening.
Yep, absolutely. So I think this is a good question. Since CMMC 2.0 was released, we've mostly ignored and just focused on NIST 800-171 since it overlaps with level 2. Is this a sound strategy, or could additional requirements be added back in, like in CMMC 1.0 level 3?
Yeah, I'm going to answer this by telling a quick story. Really quick story. Chris Newborn, I mentioned him earlier. He's an advisor, partner of ours. He works with us, former Defense Acquisition University cybersecurity professor. In other words, guy's responsible for teaching everybody in the DoD about this stuff. Heavily involved in this for a long time. His advice to us 5-6 years ago, maybe, was do not worry about anything but 800-171. Just focus on 800-171. Ignore CMMC. I even wrote a blog article that CMMC doesn't exist. And it was based on that concept that stop worrying about CMMC, just focus on 800-171. And that proved to be sound advice. I went from CMMC 1.0 to 2.0 with our clients, and we had no issues because we kept focused on 800-171. So to answer that, yeah, absolutely. Stay focused on 800-171. Don't worry about revision 3 of 800-171 coming and its impact on CMMC. That's going to be very far down the road. Just stay focused on 800-171, revision 2. They specifically call out revision 2 through the proposed rule a million times. There's some belief that they will actually revise DFAR 7012 to actually have the revision number in it. They may not. Right now, it just says whatever is currently at the time of contract award. And there's a lot of concerns. Jamie and I were talking about this earlier, I think it was last week, about this, that there's a concern, well, revision 2 is what's required for CMMC, but if revision 3 comes out officially, then DFAR 7012 means you automatically have to start complying with revision 3, and now you're trying to manage both. I don't see that happening. Everyone I've talked to doesn't expect that to happen. DoD will probably do something to make sure that that's not an issue. Class deviation is what's being talked about the most. So my point right now is you can prepare for Rev 3. That's a good thing, but do not worry about it as far as it affecting CMMC for a while. Focus on NIST 800-171 Rev 2.
And I think, just to add on to that, that was the next question, but I think we're in violent agreement that Rev 2 is what you need to focus on. And you brought up a really interesting point on our conversation last week that, not only is the assessment methodology, all of the scoring, everything in CMMC based around Rev 2, but so are the costing models. And that might actually be more important because if the DoD were to try to introduce Rev 3 into CMMC, all of those costs that they've said, small businesses should already have absorbed by meeting 800-171. Well, when you introduce Rev 3, you introduce new control families that they theoretically would then need to spend to meet those requirements. So they would literally have to redo all of their costing models, and that may require new rulemaking. So yeah, we're telling folks the same thing. Focus on Rev 2. If Rev 3 ever does come into CMMC, it'll likely be years, and you'll have ample time to prepare for that. So I think we covered those two.
Cool.
Next question, if a customer is CMMC level 3, does that compliance level flow down to all vendors?
Excellent question, and this is an important one. From the question itself, the answer is no, as far as does it flow down to all vendors. But if you are on a contract that's requiring level 3 and you are level 3, and you're going to be flowing any of that quote unquote level 3, the CUI plus, as one of our friends calls it, you're going to be flowing that information down to a subcontractor, then that subcontractor would also have to be level 3. If you're flowing down regular CUI to them, then they would have to be level 2 at a minimum. It states in there that if your vendor's level 3, you have to be level 2 at a minimum. So it's really going to depend on that flow down, on what is being flowed down, what the requirements are of the prime, and then that will drive what has to go down to your vendor. So not all vendors, but the applicable vendors.
Yeah, and I would assume to meet the DoD estimates of 1.5%, 2%, whatever it is that will need level 3, they're going to not be flowing down much of that CUI, right? If you have a prime with 1,000 subs, they can't flow down that level 3 CUI to 1,000 subs to maintain that 1,500 level that they're estimating.
Yep.
So here's a more specific control-based question in regard to control 313.16 and 801.71 Rev 2. What is the definition of at rest? And I believe this has to do with encrypting, data at rest. Is it just when it's in storage, as Rev 3 seems to suggest? Because they talk about, if you're doing a job and in process from start to finish, is the encryption not needed until data goes into storage? And this is really in reference to CAD/CAM software, other probably OT, where you can't realistically encrypt it while the job is going on.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of hard to encrypt in use. Makes it very difficult. So the answer to that is at rest is essentially in storage. They actually define it in 3.13.16. The full is sc.l2-3.13-16. But they basically say information at rest refers to the state of information when it is not in process or in transit and is located on storage devices as specific components of systems. So that's the full sentence. It starts out, it goes more, but it's basically stating, yeah, at rest is in storage, not being used, encrypted, FIPS, etc., FIPS 140, FIPS verification, FIPS validation, all of that is really driven in the proposed rule.
Great. I think that answers that question pretty definitively. Let me see if we have any others. Just a question about what is CTI's role within CMMC and CUI. I believe CTI is just a category of CUI, but maybe if you want to just expound upon that a little bit.
So CTI is controlled technical information. It is a form of CUI. It is the biggest form of CUI in the DoD because that's the vast majority of the CUI for the DoD is controlled technical information. So CTI is just a category of CUI.
Excellent. Okay. And then just to wrap up, I'll take this one. There were a few questions that came in live specific to the FedRAMP memo that came out late last week, which obviously everyone's paying a lot of attention to. Kelly, I know when we spoke, you mentioned that the C3PAO forum and other of your constituents had a lot of questions around that. I'll just add from the Prevail side, because there were some specific Prevail questions. We're obviously paying very close attention to it. We're actually meeting with DIBCAC very soon so they can review our body of evidence. We've had our 3PAO attestation already done. So more to come on that. I would say it's a little too early to make any definitive answers around that because the information is so new. I think we're all digesting it, and there are still some questions out there. But I think that's all the questions we had. We'll leave it open for maybe another minute or two in case any other questions come in. Orly, can you put up Kelly's contact info in case anybody wants to reach out to him? And Kelly, maybe just talk a little bit about the services you offer and if anybody's interested in a JSBA or other assessment type services.
Absolutely. Yep. As mentioned before, we are one of the 50 authorized C3POs, number 45. We're out here on the West Coast. One of the few, there's not very many C3POs actually out here in California, surprisingly. So yeah, if there's anybody in that anywhere near California, we've been already working and talking with clients in Alaska and Hawaii and California and this whole West Coast. So we are available for support for doing mock assessments for a C3PO, for doing the actual, as you mentioned, the joint surveillance voluntary assessments. Or we also do the consulting side. We can't do both for one client, but we also do the CMMC consulting and have worked with many small businesses and medium businesses, small business manufacturers, technology, transport, very, very well versed in this whole world of getting a CMMC implemented, which is not easy. More than happy to talk to anybody. If you have questions, you want to chat about any side of this, give us a call. Again, you see my name on there. I'm Kelly, my business partner, Chuck. Feel free to reach out. Love talking with everybody about this. This is all we do.
Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate you joining this month's episode. And before we go, since you're the guest, you have the responsibility of picking this month's Starbucks gift card winner. And again, just to recap the questions that came in, Do you think CMMC will pass through? Since CMMC was released, should we focus on 800-171 versus CMMC? If a customer is CMMC level 3, how does that impact our supply chain? Specific control about data at rest encryption, and then the question about CTI. So pick a winner for us, and then we will.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think I'm gonna go with I think the focus on 800-171 question, because that is so fundamental of just stay focused on 800-171. I think that was my favorite question. A lot of them, I mean, they're all great questions and good clarifications, but I think that one's my favorite. So that would be my pick.
Excellent. Well, thanks for everyone attending. We'll be sure to notify the person that sent that question in as the winner. And we look forward to seeing everyone next month. Kelly, it was great to have you on. Appreciate your time, your expertise, and have a great day, everyone. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.